Anyway, Rauno, so time for another hand history. I'm happy you're back.
That's right. I'm happy to be back.
Oh yeah!
I was missing those hand history reviews. I mean, I was chilling on the beach in the Maldives, and is it pronounced Maldives?
I know. This guy in the video, he said something completely different. So.
Yeah, anyways, I was chilling on the beach and I felt that something was missing from my life, but now I know that this piece, those hand history reviews, is back in the puzzle that is my existence. So
happy to hear.
Glad to be here. Woo! So today what we're going to do is we're going to look at a spot where I, as a mid-stakes MTT reg, felt quite uncomfortable, and a spot that is going to be popping up a lot more for all of you guys who are grinding online as the metagame develops towards people check raising from the big blind more versus late position opens and small c-bets. So in particular, the spot that I chose, which can be extrapolated to many similar flops, was button opening, big blind flatting. Particular stack depth isn't that important, but let's assume that we're 50 bigs deep, just for the sake of clarity. Flop comes down, 10 of spades, 2 of hearts, 2 of spades, big blind checks, button c-bets 1/3, which I think is fairly standard.
Yeah, it tends to happen all the time on paired boards.
Can make this bet with our entire range pretty much. I think it's quite reasonable. And then we get check raised we can discuss different sizings, but what was the assumption that we took?
That Willen check raise pretty much 3x.
Yeah, pretty much 3x.
Bit less than 3x, which tends to be pretty standard. Between 2.5x and 3x, people tend to check raise.
Yeah. So this close to 3x check raise sizing needs to work as a bluff when we look at it from Willen's perspective, like 40% of the time or something like that. So basically, in order to prevent Willen from having a profitable raise with any two on this kind of a dry texture, we actually need to be defending
60%?
A very large proportion or range. Yeah, 60%. So if we assume that it needs to work exactly 40%, then the minimum defense frequency is going to be 60%. And while minimum defense frequencies, I think, have been overused in the past and aren't really applicable in many spots in poker due to range asymmetries, I think they are a very good way of looking at raising spots, because we always want to prevent our villain from having a profitable raise with any two cards. So in this spot, I felt that I wasn't really that comfortable in terms of constructing my range and knowing exactly what combos need to go into my range when I'm defending versus a good reg check raising here in order to prevent him from being able to bluff with any two cards.
To explain it a little bit as well, the whole range here on the right side, this is the range you opened with.
Yes.
Everything over there.
Yeah, this is the range that I opened the button with versus good players in the blinds. So we can go to the entire range tab here, so we can see that it's 42% of hands. It's quite tight, but I think it's probably good versus good aggressive regulars. It's a range that we can easily defend versus free bets, and we're not going to get exploited by aggressive players, and everyone, I think, tends to lean towards aggression these days. So I think it's a solid range to open as a non-exploitative strategy.
And if we go back to the last the group range,
yeah.
So we can see this is your whole range you're opening, but if you're using 100% c-bet strategy and we need to defend 60% of our range against the check raise, it's not going to be that easy, right?
Yeah, for sure not. Especially like knowing on the fly how many combos there are in your range and exactly how many combos constitutes 60%. I guess when you know how many combos there are in a range, then it's easy to figure out how many combos you need. But to know what combos exactly you have to defend is going to be pretty difficult in game, I think, when you haven't studied those spots in depth. So I guess like the value that we're looking to provide today is look at this one texture and give you an idea how wide you're actually going to have to defend to prevent villains from raising very aggressively in these textures, which I think is going to be counterintuitive to a lot of players. So do you want to walk us through the groups we have here?
The blue here on the screen, as I understand, is hands that we c-bet and have to call off, defend against the check raise.
Yeah.
And the blue ones, red ones, are the hands that we bet fold.
Yeah. So basically the way I constructed this range was that I always kept the figure that I had to defend 60% of my range in mind, at least 60% of my range. And then I just started adding hands to this blue group, which is my defending range, from firstly including all the pairs and like all the over pairs, all the 10x, all the deuce x, then obviously all the flush draws, and seeing like where I end up percentage wise. And when I had added all the sort of obvious hands that I just mentioned to the range, I was still like super far off from the minimum defense frequency I needed to have. So
were you like around 40%, or was it even less?
Yeah, I guess like 40% at most. I was maybe even at like 35-ish or something like that.
So that was like all backdoor, all flush draws, all backdoor flush draws.
Yeah.
All
made hands and all flush draws.
Mm.
And also backdoor flush draws with 2 overs, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So after that, what did you start adding then? Was it like 2 overcard combos?
Yeah, I think I first went to like the backdoor flush draws that also had good backdoor straight potential. So like in this texture, it would be like Jack 9 of hearts, for example.
Mm.
And then next, I think I went to the overcard combos, like 2 overs, particularly the ones with a backdoor flush draw. Let's say the ace king off with the ace of spades or a king of spades would be a good candidate to defend. And then I went to the lower aces. I think like backdoor not flush draws are pretty good here when people are bluffing aggressively, because we're so far ahead of some of their bluffs and we have good implied odds when it comes down for flush, because we can stack them flush versus flush.
That was something somewhat new to me. Was I was defending pretty much. If I expected my opponent to be really aggressive in this spot, I was defending a lot of my ace highs. And what I realized actually that having 2 overcards is actually more valuable than having an ace high in the spot. Instead, like let's say ace 7 off is a little bit worse than calling here, but calling with queen jack off, because if your opponent has 10 x's, he already has pairs, so your ace high actually has only 3 overcards, 3 outs. I mean. And if Willem has, let's say, 7, 8 of hearts, then 2 overcards is still better than like ace 7 or ace 5, let's say, if you have ace 5 there.
Yeah, for sure. And like even if when we take all of those hands that I just mentioned, like all the backdoor not flush draws and all the like strong 2 overcard hands, we still weren't anywhere close enough to the 60% figure that we needed to get to. So that's where it gets, I think, kind of counterintuitive for a lot of people. Like you may even be defending those like backdoor not flushes, but I don't think many people are defending stuff like king jack offsuit here with no backdoor draws.
Yeah, definitely not.
But those are actually like pretty good defending hands when people are bluffing this aggressively, because obviously we'll have 2 overs versus top pair and we are beating all of their bluffs. So it actually makes a lot of sense to defend those hands. So yeah, for me it was like very educational to see all those combos having to be included in this range to get to the minimum defense frequency. What were you going to say?
The first assumption I'm going to already make is like it's hard to see population defending this much after c-betting. Like
for sure. I think very few regulars are defending like those kinds of ranges, particularly in these types of textures.
So we should be, if we are in Willen's shoes, we should be pretty aggro here. We should go really out of the line and start check raising like a lot.
Yeah, I think like obviously people are gonna like catch on to it if they just start check raising every hand. But in MTTs, oftentimes we just play like we have this one spot versus a particular opponent, and then we get new tables and stuff. So I think this definitely like plays in the favor of us being super aggressive in these ports, because I don't think that the population is defending correctly versus very aggressive check raises. And they might actually be defending correctly in a sense that the population isn't check raise bluffing here aggressively enough. So it also makes sense to fold more exploitatively. But here I was talking like specifically about good aggressive regs playing versus each other and trying to make the most money versus each other. So yeah, a lot of those very counterintuitive hands have to be defended. And one thing I also wanted to mention that I probably should have mentioned earlier on was that the 60% figure that we now barely get to, having included all of those counterintuitive hands in our range, is probably us still defending too few hands because our opponent's bluffs have equity. So for example, if our opponent only, let's say, continues betting on those turns where his cards improves and we only defend 60% of the hands, then he's still making money bluffing with any two, because there are going to be some hands, some turns where he's going to outdraw us. So theoretically, we're going to have to defend more aggressively on the flop if we know that our opponent is capable of bluffing very, very wide here.
And talk about defending more. If Finland's check raise sizing is even smaller, let's say 2.2x, then we have to defend even more. And that usually happens when the stack sizes are lower, especially in tournaments when you have like 20 big blind effective stacks. Then definitely there's a question, does the population even c-bet their whole range here? Probably ace highs are getting checked behind more often, maybe even king highs for sure down value. But overall, it's hard to see people defending as much as they have to against check raises.
For sure. I think another thing that maybe should be mentioned here is that this button opening range is pretty tight, which obviously makes it easier for us to defend when we face a raise because we have a stronger range. But a lot of people are opening way wider on the button. They're going to have like a lot more of those offsuit kings. They're going to have a lot of those suited jacks, suited tens. So their overall button opening range maybe like 55% instead of 42%, I think. Few regs actually play this tight usually. So that means it's going to be like even way harder for them to respond versus check raises, because they're going to have so many more trash hands that they just, are going to have a very hard time finding a call with.
What did we learn?
What we will learn is that versus good players, we have to defend many hands very aggressively versus those check raises on dry boards. Those hands that might be counterintuitive for some people include stuff like backdoor flush draws with backdoor straight draws, like even queen and jack high ones, and also hands like just Broadway overcards without backdoors. Particularly when people are using a small sizing like 2.5x. So that would be lesson number one. Lesson number two would be that people probably aren't defending enough on those boards. So we should be check raising those boards quite aggressively, especially versus weaker players. Is there anything else, Major?
What I stated before, for me at least, that two overcards actually are potentially better than having an ace high in this spot.
Yeah, and also like Power Requilab is a really awesome program that I would like to show, because you can make like all of those groupings in ranges and figure those things out in a very intuitive manner.
And Equilab itself is free, and Power Equilab, you actually have 2 weeks of free trial.
Yeah, go check it out. Go check it out for sure. So yeah, I think this is pretty much it. I mean, we could definitely go more in depth into this topic. You guys can let us know whether this is interesting to you. If not, we can make different types of videos. If this is interesting to you, we can go do more of this kind of like range work and maybe look at some how we continue on some turns and drivers, for example, in one of the next episodes. If you like this kind of thing. So
I enjoyed it.
Let us know. See ya. It was really long.
Oh shit, I was streaming. I didn't record. We streamed it. Hey guys. So It's so funny. When you look at yourself, how do I look at the screen? I feel more sweaty as well. This is so funny. It's just funny though. Maybe we should do it as a live stream next time as well, because when we fuck it up, it's funny, and we can redo it if we don't want to.